Hello, my friends. Welcome back to Healing the Divide. On this podcast, we explore the depths of the human experience, and in particular, the chasms of division that arise within us, between us, and amongst us. Our intention is to call in the powerful vehicle of conversation to fill these chasms with deeper curiosity, consciousness, compassion, communication, and ultimately connection. Today, we embark upon an exploration into the realm of the deeper structures of consciousness itself as we investigate the neuroterrains of sleeping, lucid dreaming, the death process, liberation, and healing through the use of both psilocybin, yoga nidra, breathwork, and music. We are joined by Dr. Nick Atlas. Dr. Nick is the Director of Evolutionary Education and Institute for Experiential Learning and the Advancement of Mind-Body Healing and Mystical Arts and Science, an expert on how we heal through non-ordinary states of consciousness, including yoga nidra, lucid dreaming, and psychedelics. Dr. Nick has spent 25 years with experience in the field, having facilitated several hundred solo and group psychedelic journeys with a variety of medicines. He holds a PhD in psychology with multiple certifications, has taught extensively at the university level, and currently serves as faculty chair at Atlantic University. In addition to his work with psychedelics, he offers personal and professional training in breathwork, meditation, yoga nidra, and lucid dreaming or dream yoga, and specializes in trauma sensitive, body centered approaches for emotional release. He works with a wide range of clients dealing with various issues, including anxiety, depression, OCD, substance abuse, and terminal illness, as well as those seeking spiritual awakening, reconnection, and realization. Originally from New York City, Nick has authored a memoir called The Light Travelers, which details his own mind expanding journey and subsequent world travels. And he enjoys making music, especially improvisational circle singing, as well as open water swimming, dancing, and hiking with his dog at his home in the Berkshire Mountains of Western Massachusetts. Nick, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that long-winded introduction.
Listen, you've had quite a journey, so there's a lot to cover. Grateful for you being here and letting us have this little bit of time to be the beneficiaries of some of the insights and inspirations you've come across along the way.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. And I was thinking about this before we started, because for those of you listening, we've been planning this for a few weeks now, and I don't really know anything. So anything that I share, anything that we get into, it's just, like the pinky fingernail, the tip of your fingernail compared to the vast oceans of knowledge that exist. So it's all just one little take on stuff. Hopefully you'll find it interesting.
Yeah, I appreciate the disclaimer, and it's one of those things that it's like the more we know, the less we know, or the more we realize there's so much more to know, and that it seems to, at least for me, that feeling is like the feeling of awe, because it's like it's expansive. It's like we're feeling into something greater than we've felt before if we continue to explore, and yet what it reflects back to us is that tiny little pin drop of experience that this is, and together we get to explore the great mystery, and it just implores us to continue to explore. And I know that from my experiences in working with you, for those listening, Nick has been a guest faculty member in the yoga teacher training that I facilitate, and getting to not just take in what you share, but how you share and who you are is what has inspired me to invite you into this container to have this conversation together. And and be a little loose with it, let it have its own life, but to let it be its own exploration, as I shared in the intro. So,
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and anything that we get into and anything that I have been interested in all these years they're just vehicles. I had a friend once, right before I went back to graduate school, my friend said to me, we were camping out in the Adirondacks, and he said, the problem with academia is that they focus on so many things instead of focusing on just one thing. And I understood that to mean, the one thing, that there's connection. I think that's like, if there's one thing that I would hope that we come away with from our conversation and that is somehow transmitted to the audience, it's like that we're all here together, participating in this, participating in life in the present, and all the words and all the talk and all the information are just vehicles to get to that ultimate truth.
absolutely. And I couldn't have asked for a more supportive segue. So thank you for that. In the sense that in the introduction, I had shared like ultimately connection and the podcast Healing the Divide, and it's an interesting name because in a sense I don't believe that the divide is real. I think it's a conditional aspect of nature and human nature that we experience. But I kind of operate with a fundamental sense of the true nature is connected. So can we return to what we most deeply are through whatever means resonate with us? But I wanted to kick the conversation off, kind of starting big picture. And as someone who is both a practitioner and a teacher, someone who is rooted in both science and spirituality, how does your understanding of the nature of self or soul, or however you would hold that to be, what you would hold it to mean, how does that understanding inform one's relationship, in your estimation, to the experience of life, death, and perhaps even rebirth, if that's an idea that lives within your embrace? If we could see behind the veil, so to speak, the Maya, how would that vision change the way we think about life itself?
Can you reiterate that one more time? I just want to make sure like I know exactly what you're asking.
Yeah, if we could kind of see behind the veil of life and death and whatever's behind that, and then come back into deeper recognition of the experience of being alive, how and let me say this too, I see your work as doing that, sort of thinning the veil, whether it's through psychedelics, through dharma, through breath, meditation, nidra, all these tools. So how do you see like gleaning a deeper nature of soul as informing the nature of life?
Yeah, that's a big question. Well, there's like a whole spectrum of experience, I think, and everybody's going to be at a little different place in terms of where what they're grasping and how it's informing the way that they live.
Mm.
So, on the one hand, and I realize that for some people listening to this, there may be some kind of almost like ontological leaps here, leaps of faith. This ideas of what is kind of beneath the surface, and like what is our true nature, whether there is such a thing. So I don't want to proselytize in any way or assume that people even have are familiar with these ideas. But maybe the place to start is this idea that it's possible for us to shift consciousness from our what we might call our ordinary day-to-day consciousness and touch into something that at least feels like or resembles some kind of ultimate reality. That could just be like a quirk of our brains, or maybe there is something there that we're able to connect with or tap into. So all these different things that I've studied have basically been vehicles to do that, modalities that enable us to, like you say, sort of lift the veil. I think that there's something inherent in just being able to have that experience that alleviates a tremendous amount of anxiety. the big picture is that we're all kind of, and I don't want to sound too grim, but we're all sort of against the clock. We're all kind of going through life and like doing the best we can to make our lives enjoyable while also trying to survive. But behind all that is this imminent death, the end of it all. And I think that is a kind of irreducible existential thing, a fear, if you want to call it that, or at least fear is something that we can choose, to engage with respect to this end of life, this idea that at some point our life's going to end and we're going to die. And I think that fear of death and the anxiety that comes with that shapes people's lives. From even if you're not consciously thinking of that on a day-to-day basis, it's sort of at the basis of our sense of selfhood. And that trickles out to like road rage and, anxiety about money and anxiety about not having enough time to do the things you love to do. And kind of like all the day-to-day things that we get caught up in, you can sort of trace them back to a few really basic needs. Do I have enough shelter? Do I have enough warmth? Are my loved ones okay? Really basic concerns. When we're able to tap into this kind of ultimate reality that is beyond time and at least experientially feels like it's beyond our physicality, it liberates us from those fears and anxieties because it feels like a place that is somehow beyond death or beyond even a cycle of life and death. So you can imagine that if one of us if anybody through their practice or through their philosophy or whatever vehicle they take could spend even a few moments free from all of the worldly concerns and with a kind of experiential knowing that life, or maybe not life, but consciousness doesn't end when we die, and that there really is nothing so important that we ought to be worrying, in a way that cripples us, that ultimately we're okay. We've always been okay. We're always going to be okay. It's a kind of, in yogic philosophy, they'd say truth, consciousness, bliss. It's like the peace that comes from knowing that there's really nothing to worry about. And that is what these modalities are all about. And I think that's kind of the gift of being able to tap in to this deeper sense of selfhood, or even go beyond that to just a kind of infinite existence, if you will.
I want to take a breath and receive that and let it.
Yeah, that was wordy.
No. It was beautiful. So beautiful, brother. Thank you for that. Such a clear elucidation of really the heart of A, where the question was birthed from, and B, the shared resonance of what I think these practices are about. And they can get utilized for so many different expressions, and they all have such benefit to us in different ways. It's not hierarchical, but in the pure sense of what their ultimate potentiality holds. I think it's important to frame this conversation with that really big picture. So I appreciate the time you took to detail it with such clarity. One question that I have is, so when people start to approach that experience of what you call the ultimate reality or the deeper sense of selfhood, there is often an incredible fear that precedes that profound release of anxiety, etc. And it seems to be like the grasping to the construct of identity, of where I have outsourced security or worth or wholeness, and a fear of that ground being threatened. And that can create almost a terror in a sense. And yet the experience that ultimately unfolds and I'm going to speak subjectively for a moment, that there's not so much a conquering of the ego or a throwing away of the personality or a false sense of self, but just sort of an expansion of consciousness that then contextualizes that identity in relationship to the broader sense of consciousness that we actually are, that we're not really dismissing anything or getting rid of anything. We are reorienting to it from a deeper ground, and having that, even if it's a conceptualization, to anchor to safety before entering into these deeper experience where we are shifting identity fundamentally, has felt like a game changer for me and with people that I've worked with. So I wonder how you speak to the idea, or how you hold the notion of ego, which seems to have gotten it's become like the adversary of the spiritual path. I'm thinking of recently I ran into someone who was wearing a shirt that said, your ego is not your amigo. And I was like, I'm not so sure about that, and it's almost like, I think only from the ego could we make that statement, but yet from truth, we would say, like, my ego is my amigo. So that's kind of how I hold it. I wonder if you hold it similarly, or what your take is on
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I was just having a conversation with someone about this morning, that, sometimes on the healing path or therapeutic path, or particularly on with the psychedelic path, there's this thought or this idea that we're supposed to go to war with ourselves, and
that.
really it's about befriending ourselves. It's
Yeah.
it's when you take a step back, or somehow in a healthy way disidentify from the ego, which is again basically what all these modalities and what yoga is attempting to show us. Um, you then have this opportunity to befriend it, to make peace with the various parts of yourself. And when you're fused with the ego and you don't have any kind of objective view of it, you can't really identify the parts of yourself necessarily that need to change. There may be some things that you're aware of you don't like about yourself, and other things that you do like about yourself, but there are going to be also kind of hidden subconscious, or what's sometimes called shadow things about yourself that you really can't see. So it's that ability to be able to take a step back from those things that enables us not only to kind of flesh them out, but also to change them. And the way to change them is to learn to accept them, and to release some of the habits, tension, stressors, anxiety, everything that's kind of pent up in those parts of ourselves. And I wanted to make, just to be clear, that we were talking about ultimate reality, that again, I'm not making this claim that there is an ultimate reality that one has to buy into, but it's more the experience of what feels like, what looks like and smells like ultimate reality that each of us are capable of having. So when we can, somehow drop into that deeper ground of being, as you put it, then we gain that perspective. And the ego keeps us alive. The ego is we're and this is a tough line. It's a tough dichotomy. Is that they say in some traditions that the more you have these kinds of transcendent experiences, that you are living in the world but not necessarily of the world. And the idea is that you still need your ego to go to the grocery store and take care of your family and like do all the worldly things, but it shouldn't feel like a burden. It should feel like a useful tool or part of yourself that enables you to survive. And the important thing is to keep it in balance, so that it doesn't get a big ego, so it doesn't become the star of the show and think that this is all there is. And too much self-importance basically is kind of the when things go awry. So being able to gain that larger perspective over the ego and a larger sense of self helps keep ourselves in check, because we get a sense of our role and how we fit in the greater cosmic flow of things. And I think from that place we're able to make better decisions and be kinder to the people in our lives and to everything else in our lives, kind of have a more harmonious relationship with everything, because we recognize ourselves as a part of everything.
It's an interesting takeaway that when we can enter into these consciousness expanding practices, we're moving away from identification with an aspect of nature that has largely subsumed our idea of self, and we're growing it, but without rejecting it or denying it. We're transcending that identification, but sort of wrapping it into this broader tapestry of self. And yet it's not even just simply self in the individuated but not separated sense. There's also this deeper recognition of connection with one another that you just presence, that when we touch upon this, there is an attribute or property of, if we want to call it truth or being or ground, or it gets, where words start to lose their power to describe. But whatever that is, there's a felt sense of the root of me is we, and there is a shared experience that's fundamental to the individual experience. And that's it's so therapeutic and medicinal to feel that, because so much of our, I think, experience of suffering, it sits inside of the idea that we're alone. And just that unto itself is such a healing balm for us to receive. And I wanted to ask your thoughts. You said you had worked with people with terminal illness. I don't know if you have had experiences that have kind of walked right up into that moment of transition from bodily life into that continuation of consciousness. But I've been doing a little bit of studying on this end of life experience and the visions that can come at those times, the priorities perhaps that are clarified for us, and the insights, but also the healing work that can happen profoundly in very few moments of a recalibration to whatever this picture is. It's as if we're getting a little bit of that peek into what's beyond this while we're here, just enough to express it. And it seems like so often it comes down to this idea of relationships, to the people that we journey with and the love that we share, and wanting there to be harmony and love inside of those spaces. And I wonder what your experiences have gleaned that you could share with our listeners and viewers from being present in those stages of people's journey.
Yeah. Well, I haven't sat with anyone at the moment that they expire. Um, Although I applaud people that do that work, because obviously it's very powerful. My sense is, just anecdotally, yeah, that in as people get closer and closer to that moment, there is a kind of recapitulation that can happen, where you look back over your life, and amongst other things, what takes precedence is your relationships to family and friends. Even people that seemingly were insignificant or on the fringes can suddenly come back, come to memory, or kind of come to light. The imagination opens a little bit, and you just kind of see those things. There's a film called Big Fish, where at the end of the film, Ewan McGregor's character is being kind of wheeled down to a pond where they're going to toss him in and he's going to become a fish. Sorry if I spoiled it for you, but and he sees everybody from his whole life. Everybody that was there in this kind of visionary journey of his, they all show up and they're all waving and hi. And the people, I've heard a lot of stories of people having experiences like that, And I think it speaks to, what you said, which is for all the things that happen in our lives, what's most important are the harmony in our relationships. Ayurveda says really similar thing, and not just our relationships with people, but with places and with the elements and everything else. But I think specific to the human experience is this need to feel like we're in congruence with all these other energies, all these other people in our lives, because of the way they touch our heart and the things that they teach us. I think that through all the years of study and doing this, doing all this different kinds of work, everything has kind of come back to interrelationships and the importance of really listening deeply to one another and trying to meet and help open people's hearts, and meet people in the heart. And you could say that there's some kind of karmic significance to it. I mean, I think that's like the best that I've got at this point, is that sometimes it feels like life really, maybe not life, again, we have to be kind of careful how we use that one, but like the journey of the soul is not complete until like everything is kind of in alignment. I know that's what feels like the peak experiences of my lifetime are when things feel in balance with the person that I'm directly in front of, or with like all the different people of my lifetime, and kind of like cleaning up the messes from along the way of relationships that have gone south, or mistakes that have been made in relationships. Everything kind of comes back to like being better able to show up for others, and find that resonance with people. So it's almost like beyond our lifetime. It's kind of how it feels.
Yeah, there's this idea in the various teachings, yogic, etc., that we both study of samskara. And I think for those of us that are listening that are new to that word, it's this idea of these imprints or impressions from life experiences that get stored in us. And they're so often wounds that are relational in nature. And the opportunity for repair at a soul level, even when it hasn't been available at a bodily life level, is profound. And a lot of the teachings in yoga and in Buddhism purport that the samskaras are what reincarnate, that it's the this sort of aggregate of our karma that get keeps. And again, not to jump into these, as you described, ontological leaps of faith, I want to be sensitive to different people's belief systems as well. But even if it was not within notions of reincarnation but post incarnation, or even if you said there's nothing after this or beyond this, three-dimensional material experience, even if it's just the nature of the experience itself, the idea that we can inwardly work with these impressions, these wounds, and heal them. And I wanted to get your thought on this, because we're speaking about it more in an interpersonal context, but I was thinking about it intrapersonally as well, and the quote unquote others as being all the versions of us that didn't get to maybe integrate along their trajectory of this life journey, and that we get to go back and kind of collect them back in and integrate these exiled aspects of ourselves through these practices as well. And if indeed we do go, if consciousness does not only continue in a linear sense of time beyond this experience, but is just existing beneath and behind it, and whether there are other aspects of this consciousness procreating on this earth and in a different dimension or in future lives, that it seems to me that the healing is also a gift to those other versions of me that are somewhere else or yet to be. So in that sense of recapitulation, that future me's, let's call it, on that, like, not just generational trauma being healed, but like the generations of this soul's line that I am, it's like the work I'm doing now will be the inheritance of that soul's biological and karmic recapitulation process. And that feels like it allows me to approach my suffering through the lens of it being service. And when I hold that orientation towards it, it softens and invites that sense of kinship and warmth and friendship that you spoke to. I wondered if you hold it in a similar light, or how you see that sense of the soul's journey in the work that we do here and now, and how that might shape that bigger picture of self.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we don't have any proof of life beyond death. There are traditions that speak about it. There are definitely people who have, claim to have more knowledge or understanding of it, and even experientially. But for all, the best that we've got is now, is what's happening in this lifetime. And to your point, and this is interesting. As you were speaking, I was kind of like thinking of this way of framing this. It doesn't really matter if we're trying. Let me take that back. Maybe it does matter. I mean, when we're doing healing work, it is ultimately a selfless act, because, as you said, we're either trying to heal ourselves so that we are moving towards some kind of enlightenment or something like that. But simultaneously, by working on ourselves, we impact everything around us. Our immediate relations in this lifetime, future generations. It's sort of like each of us is giving off a signal or emits some kind of ripple through time and space. And as we enhance the quality of our ripple, our signal, our beacon vibration, whatever we want to call it, it's going to have a residual impact on everyone and everything forever. That's just kind of that's physics. So yeah, I mean, I think in a sense, as we change ourselves, whether or not you end up then having children and, you've changed your DNA, so to pass on different kind of DNA, that would be a natural way of shaping karma, future karma. But there's also nurturing. So, let's say maybe you don't have children and you're a teacher or something like that, or you're just a person who has a conversation that somehow filters its way down to a future generation. It impacts the way that they think and the way that they act. Everything always has an impact. There's always
Yeah.
some kind of life after, every single word and syllable that we're uttering has some kind of impact. And on the one hand, you could kind of come back to what you said before, like this about the terror of all of this, is that if you get too caught up in like the impact of the thing, it's easy it can shut you down. That, oh my gosh, I have to like dot every I and cross every T, because if I don't, it's like the fate of the world is at stake. But if you approach it that way, you're not really living it, living the harmony, living the balance. And that's kind of what we're after, is that it's in the body and not just in the theory. So yeah, I think I'll pause there. I've got some more thoughts on that, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's a slippery slope, because we can practice non-attachment to come into essentially not a suppression, but a deeper form of acceptance of what you were speaking to earlier. And then out of that recognition, we can see the ripple effect because of the connection. we can imagine into the implications, and then we can attach to the outcomes of those implications. So it is a continuous practice to notice what the meaning making machine of the mind does with the understanding of the soul. And when we're in that, I can see that it requires us, it implores us to stay with the practices to, in a sense, kind of keep us honest with it, and to not miss life in the process, because we can get so caught up in these various theoretical framings that we miss the deep present moment experience that we're having. So I really appreciate that response. And go ahead. I have another thought, but I
Well,
want
yeah,
to hear you.
it's this paradox of not being important, and at the same, being an ant on a giant rock, right? That has this very finite lifespan amidst I don't know how many billions of other ants that are living just in this at this exact moment. And soon in 100 years from now, all the ants will have turned over, and they'll just be like a brand new 8 billion or 10 billion other ants. So we're almost like insignificant. And at the same time, everything that we do is significant and has significance. So it's being able to kind of hold that paradox in a light way so that it doesn't cause any stress, and you allow yourself to be an effortless ant, to let life just sort of guide you and flow through you. And obviously this is like, I think this is what all these traditions are basically are the antidote for, is how to like strike that balance. And it's very tough when we've inundated ourselves with technology and multitasking forever and ever, and all the things that we've sort of like made a big funky web for ourselves, and it's hard to find our way out. And at the same time, the truth of it, of like how to be in that perpetual state of flow, it doesn't take an enormous amount of effort. It just takes a lot of discipline. So maybe we conflate the two, but it just takes sort of finding ways to enter into that flow and let that be the guiding force of our lives.
Absolutely. I to pick up on that thread is, I think when we can transform our relationship to that, from the discipline of having to the devotion of getting to, there's a sense of, again, subjective here for a moment, is excitement or yearning to come into those states that clarify and open me to the awe of recognition of being that ant. And it feels good. It feels good to be reconstituted into the reality of what we most deeply are. It's so nourishing to us. And so, to that extent, I'm curious if you think that when we're working on healing a particular pattern, uh, if there is a certain signature, let's call it, that each emotion has. So if I am working, let's say, on my anger, do you sense that, because of what you just shared about us being all connected and the impact of that, that I'm working on healing the archetypal energy of anger as it exists within the collective consciousness?
Yeah, I do think that each of us, there's an image. I know you're aware of it, but this image called of or under this idea of Indra's net, where we're all this this infinite web of, and you can imagine like little droplets of water on each intersection of the web, and they're all reflecting one another, and each of us is like that little droplet of water. So if there's anger in the web anywhere, it's going to reflect onto all the other drops within that web. So this is basically, I think the way things are. Until, as long as there's anger in one person, we haven't, rid ourselves of this thing. And we could debate whether it can be a useful tool or it's something that's functional for us. But I
Right.
think, generally speaking, and I remember once having a conversation with a therapist about this, that, anger personally doesn't serve me. Like it feels like a poison inside, and something that, I would be better off not having. Or if there is a purpose to it, it should be in very small amounts when it gets triggered, and we should have the resilience and the wherewithal to not let it then like cause us to react in detrimental ways. So if each of us works on ourselves in that way, we are simultaneously cleaning the whole ocean, of this thing. And all that little change, if you were to somehow eradicate anger from yourself or minimize it to such a degree where it's just not a factor in your life, everybody around you is gonna benefit from that, and so on and so forth, all the way out. It's gonna have that ripple.
So in the sense of moving from theory into practice, can we shift?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I wanted to establish some ways that we're thinking and holding and relating to these ideas because I feel like context is so important for practice. So one of the things that you do amongst many is explore. I'm going to put this in my own words, but explore what's like sitting like at the tip of the nose. It's like our nose is actually in our line of vision, but we've trained our eyes not to see it. And it's always there. And so I feel like you have looked at these always there practices and turned them from unconscious into conscious. And by that I mean looking at something like sleep or breathing, these basic human functions that we need to survive. And it seems like so often we think about something like, what do you need to survive? You need to sleep, you need to eat, you need to drink, you need to breathe. And in some contexts, let's take food for a moment, we come into a recognition that what we eat matters, how it impacts our health, how we eat matters, how the relationship that we even carry with our food matters so deeply to our health. Its impacts are hard to even measure. But you take something like breath, and we seem to miss the power that is inherent within how we breathe and the potentials it holds to breathe differently. And then even when we look at sleep, I think we think about like, how do we get good sleep? Like, but in terms of how can our sleeping state support our waking state, yet missing that there's something inherent within the sleeping state itself that can open us to the deeper nature of being itself. And it seems like you've almost honed in on these areas that have just been taken for granted and somewhat glossed over, and said like, hold up guys, like there's something here. Let's like rewind back the train up and let's pause and go deeper into these things that we may have just taken for granted. And so I'm hoping to dive a little bit into that and spend a little bit of time in those spaces in honor of that work, and glean an understanding of what you have encountered by studying the lucidity that is available to us in states that are otherwise often just sort of like unconscious and cloudy, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, yeah. I well put. Um, I think a lot of times, to kind of reiterate, we take for granted the things that we do most often because they're hidden in plain sight. We tend to think of spiritual practice maybe, and maybe not so much these days. I mean, I don't know. Everybody thinks of things differently, but oh, it's something like out there, it's something other than what I do with my ordinary day. Whereas I think what I've been interested in is bringing a spiritual attitude to the day-to-day things, because that's where the energy of our lives is. And we spend more or less 8 hours, 6 to 8 hours a night sleeping, most folks. And we spend a third of that in dream. So that's, over the course of someone's, we're basically spending a third of our lives asleep and a third of that time dreaming. So if you live 90 years, that's 10 years of your life that you're in a dream state, right? And dreaming is something that most people just sort of, oh, that's fun, or that's scary, or like, it's just this quirk. We don't really put a lot of effort into remembering our dreams, or maybe thinking about our dreams, or working with our dreams. But that's 10 years of life. If you thought, would you just like give up 10 years with your kid or something like that? Never, So there's like all this sort of, it's ridiculous that it's kind of unexplored or uncharted territory, but I think the reason that's happened is because it's so mysterious, and because it takes a lot of discipline to be able to really start to look at it and make sense of it. And I can't say that I understand it any better than I did when I started all these years ago. And dreaming is sort of part of the puzzle. Sleep and like what sleep represents is also part of the puzzle, and the delineation between sleeping and dreaming. And also deep relaxation. And that's where yoga nidra has come into this. So for me, I'll take you back on memory lane a little bit. I'm just going to date myself so much. I still feel really young at heart, but it's been a long time. I had an experience with my first experience with yoga nidra. My first yoga class ever was my senior year of college. And I was simultaneously taking a class on Tibetan Buddhism, and I took the yoga class and the Buddhism class together because I needed to fulfill some requirements, and I heard that they were easy A's. So I took these classes, and I'll never forget. I'm in the yoga class, and the teacher brought it. I don't think she really told us she was showing us yoga nidra, but she brought us into a state of deep relaxation. We did some stretching, some asanas for like an hour. And then at the end of the class, it was the only class that she did this of the whole semester. She had us lie down and close our eyes and brought us into this visualization for about 20 minutes. And she said, visualize the color orange. And I was just flooded with orange. And I thought it was the most incredible thing, because it was something I never thought to explore. I had never been taught that in the previous 15, 20 years of school. And it was just this like thing unlocked, this incredible capacity of our minds. So I was hooked from there and started to experiment with it more and more frequently. And subsequently had some psychedelic experience that was very similar, very comparable to the yoga nidra experience. And then in the meantime, I was, in this Buddhism class, and the Buddhism teacher was talking about these things from a little different perspective, but basically like the same ideas. Everything started to come together. So from there, I began having lucid dreams, or it was right around the same time. I started having these kind of mystical dreams. So long story short is this stuff kind of found me, and I just took to it. So if there was ever an indication that maybe there is some kind of karma, that we come back and are like on some mission greater than ourselves. I mean, this was it for me. There was just a kind of like awakening that happened at when I was 21, 22, where all of these things conspired simultaneously to show me this path. And then the deeper I went into the path, the more I was receiving guidance, literally like verbatim intuitive messages to keep going, or to explore this thing, or to explore that thing. So it cracked open this like whole mysterious branch of yoga and study and self-understanding that I'm still still following and sometimes kind of wading through today. So, it kind of found me, and I think, but it makes perfect sense, that it's like, oh, here are these things that you've just been like ignoring, like you sleep 8 hours a night. Like, what if during that time there's actually like something so special and so powerful here? And so I just sort of devoted my life to trying to understand it, or at least like get the most out of it.
Thank you so much for sharing your journey, your personal journey. I'm always grateful to hear people's stories and what inspires them and how they found that current into the work of their lives. And it's funny listening to you. I had such a similar experience. I may have shared this with you when we were chatting last time you were in town, but same thing, man. Like senior year of college, it must have been, let's say that was 1998. And I took my last class of my last semester called stress management because I needed another credit and it was an easy blow off class. And for a period of, I think it was 2 or 3 days, the teacher of the class brought in a yoga and meditation teacher. And I had never heard the word yoga before. And meditation was probably similarly peripheral to my awareness. And we did a variety of different simple practices that you could do sitting at a desk or sitting on the ground or just standing up and moving our arms. And I left there like I was stoned and just completely like, wait, like what just happened? And I had
Right.
been interested in these questions that we're talking about today, life and death and reincarnation and what am I? And sort of had that in me this whole journey, but it never had the proper instrumentation of investigation to support what was innate. And it was like I had stumbled upon something. And I just remember thinking so strongly, like, why didn't anybody tell me about this yet? Like, how could we go this many years of education through
Right.
all of school, through all of university, and come right to the very last class of the last thing right before we're about to shoot you out into the world and say, oh, and by the way, here's
There's
how
this.
you access trove of knowledge that lives within. It's like, whoa. And dude, it was like it was an on ramp. And I'm so grateful for that. And to this day, it's like picking up where we've left off in some other life experience and getting to continue that work. And it's really incredible. But to hone in a little bit on the piece of dreaming, I'm curious what you have ascertained so far of spending time in that space. Like, what are there protocols to dream yoga, to lucid dreaming? Are there practices that work well? Is it like what do we do in to prep for that? Is when we turn off electronics matter to what when we eat, what we eat? Do we meditate? Like, what are the ways that you would prepare somebody that's listening that says, "Man, I would love to try this. How do I do it?"
Yeah. And that's a very cool story. It's pretty amazing that similar kind of
Eerily,
thing. I was like, here's 20 years of knowledge, and like here's like 2 minutes of wisdom, and
yeah,
now
exactly.
you're off, go off, run with it.
We like take the 2 minutes over the 20 years
Right.
and
It's
make
like the
20
whole,
years out of 2 minutes and then some. So it's
yeah,
something.
yeah. So yeah, love our Western education system.
Ah,
Dreaming. Yeah, we do. I do love our Western education system. Parts of it. Um, Well, if you're interested in dreaming, and as you were speaking, that the other thing that like, sort of occurred to me, like the biggest shift that happened at that formative time, because it really did just like my life did a 180 after that. Um, is I didn't realize how much anxiety I had. I thought that like being up in my head and ruminating all the time, that was just the way things were, and I realized that I actually didn't know myself at all.
Mm.
even though I was going through the motions, it wasn't until the breakthrough, or it was really more like a series of breakthroughs, that I went like, whoa, I've actually had all this anxiety all these years, and now I feel somewhat freer from that. And that freedom, and to kind of come full circle, that which ultimately was a sense of like being no longer being afraid of dying. And I sort of knock on wood as I say that, because I haven't really been like put to the test in any visceral way. I've been in situations maybe where it was like pretty sketchy, but it was like the pressure was off. It's like, oh, I can just like be free now and be an ant, and I could die tomorrow, and at least I'm like doing the things that I love, and hopefully I live a long, long time. But all that anxiety that was stuck there was really like a fear of not being able to survive, or like fear of all the pressure that had been put on me by society or by parents or whatever. And suddenly that lifted, and that's when my dreams took off. It was like night and day. I just, no pun intended, I just started like being more present in my dreams. I started having more beautiful experiences in my dreams. The first piece to this, for somebody that wants to get started with it, is to start to pay attention to them. And the best way to do that is through journaling. So I'll kind of break it down in a really practical way. You ideally, and there's different ways to do this, but I would recommend that you keep a journal right next to your bed, and that you have some kind of unobtrusive light, like a headlamp or a pen light, or something that isn't going, if you sleep with somebody else, that isn't going to wake up your partner, that isn't going to wake you up too much, is probably even more important, because it's counterproductive if you get yourself too amped up at 3 in the morning or 5 in the morning or whenever this happens, and you can't fall back asleep. And that's probably the most challenging aspect of the whole thing, is that as you embark on dream work, it's this really tenuous balance, this dance of not getting too wound up in the middle of the night, or like getting too much in your head, and being able to stay in a very relaxed state of mind while transferring this experience that you just had in one aspect of your consciousness, in your dreaming awareness, onto paper. It's really this like alchemical bringing of, transferring of imagination, pure imagination, onto paper. And it's not that much different from, a writer who's sort of visualizing and bringing something in, or anybody that's doing any kind of artistic process. I mean, that's basically what's happening. What's unique about dreams is, because when you sleep, and not to like conflate too much what's happening physically with what's happening psychologically, but basically when you're asleep, your defenses are down. Your body goes limp. There's a lot less stress. There's a lot less external stressor. So all you're really up against are like habitual internal stressors, and the combination of relaxation and internal stress creates a kind of a stew in your body that manifests as imagery and sensation and feeling, and you see it in your mind's eye. So you're having this visionary experience that is a kind of a cocktail of everything that's going on in your psyche and what's going on physically. And then let's say like you wake up at 3 in the morning from a really beautiful or really vivid or really intense dream, or maybe it's even just a sort of, nonsense dream. The best thing that you can do, assuming you want to, really learn to work with your dreams and go deeper into this stuff, is to turn to one side in a very, delicate way, like you've just like caught this bubble, right? And you don't want to burst it, and just kind of get it down on paper. And you write as much as you can. And as you're writing, and it's, I really don't give this kind of detailed explanation so much. So this is cool. As you're writing, try to pay attention to, in a very delicate way, like you don't want to get hypervigilant, but try to notice the moments in the dream that seem meaningful or seem to be viscerally important. So for example, you might start writing, oh, I was walking down the street and I saw people across the street and a bus drove by. And as you're writing these things, it seems like kind of meaningless maybe. But as you keep going and recalling as much of the dream as you can, as much detail as you can, at some point there may be a moment of like, oh, that was important. That's the important part, or it's an important part. And you know it because you'll feel something emotionally, even if it's very subtle. So it really takes a kind of deep listening to the self and picking up on the moments in the dream where you feel like, there's something here. And that's one of the first teachings of Tibetan dream yoga, is learning to discern between dreams that are basically just noise and not important, and dreams that, or moments in dream that have some kind of substance, that have some kind of meaning. So the more you do this act of recording, hundreds of times, the better you're going to get at being able to discern the real nuggets in there. So that's the first step is, and I'll kind of stop there just so we can let that land, is to have a really gentle, delicate, and I can't stress that enough, right? But yet routinized way of transferring your dreams onto paper. Even if all you remember is a little detail, the best thing you can do is get it down on paper, because you'll start to recall more details that way. The yogic teacher Sri Aurobindo and the mother, the teachers, described catching a dream as like catching a tiger by the tail. And maybe all you have is the tip of the tail, and then you start to kind of reel it back in as you describe what happened. And the more you do that, over the course of months and years, you can become have incredible recall, and the recall enables you to have more interesting and nuanced dreams, because through the recall process, you're training that part of yourself that to be more aware in your dream states, and bringing more awareness to the dream state makes the dream more vivid. So dream journaling.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say, so it's dream journaling, but with such a delicate and sensitive way as to not disturb the the nature of the experience from continuing to really be transcribed from the inside to the outside. So it builds the muscle of reflective awareness that then ultimately cultivates this larger capacity of presence that then is available to you in those subtler states, the more you return to them.
Right. It's like I never really thought about it so much as like a really meditative act, but as I'm reflecting on my own experience, it is the bubble that you're holding when you emerge from the dream is both the dream and your physiological state. And you don't want to get yourself too worked up, because then you're going to have a bumpy rest of your night, which could have some benefit too. Now, granted, there's probably not the only way to do this. I'm sure there's people who have other ways, and it's I hear people who just like wake up in the morning and just try to record their dreams in the morning. But for me, the most effective way has been to record a dream the moment I awaken from it, whether it's at 3 a.m. or 6 a.m. or 8 a.m. or any time. And yeah, really, really trying to do it in such a way so as not to disturb the natural processes that your mind and body are moving through.
The bubble is such an incredible visual, the delicateness of that. I appreciate that. And a couple of things popped up in this part of it. I know there's more layers to this, and I want to hear them. I want to briefly speak to this experience of the correlation between meditation and dreaming. I don't know if you've had this experience or have encountered people who've had this experience in this work, but very often when I'm in my meditation, I will drop right back into the like the dream drama, if you will, as if it were a movie that, that was playing out in my subconscious. And it's almost like a phase of meditation where I get like plucked out of the seat of consciousness I was in, and I'm right back in the storyline of last night's dream. And it's like, wow, it's been traveling there in the background the whole time. And part of, I think, the implication of that for me has been that a lot of the mood that I might happen to be in my day is being informed by the set of emotions that I was experiencing in my dreams. And I was largely unaware of that at all. It's just like, I'm in a funky mood today, or I'm excited, I feel great today, or whatever it might
Yep.
be. And it's like, oh, this is all playing in the unconscious background of my experience. And the more that I can get in there and bring clarity to that and lucidity to that, that there is benefit to bringing awareness to the places where it has not occupied.
Right. Exactly. I mean, think about that. We wake up and we feel a certain way, or we're going about our day and we're having like a good day or a bad day, or I feel this way or that way. And it could be 100% impacted by what happened during the night that we're not even aware of. And then you multiply that by 8 billion people on the planet, and we're basically just like living unconsciously.
And it's
So, and
these
of course,
talking
right.
this thing bumper karma. We're just all like, we don't even know why we're bumping into it all. And it's a largely messy process in that
Right.
regard.
Because it's a continuum, and our consciousness and these kinds of processes, our emotional processing and everything that's going on in our system, it doesn't shut off overnight. And for folks that have had like recurrent dreams and recurrent nightmares and things like that, they can attest to that. But for all of us, that time, that 1/3 of our 24-hour day is super important. Um, yeah, yeah. I'll stay there.
I had this experience a number of years ago. I woke up, got dressed, and getting ready to head out the door to go teach a yoga class, actually. And there's about a 30-minute drive from my home to the yoga studio. And as I'm walking out out of my bedroom, I see on the dresser my harmonica. And I was like, ooh, yeah, harmonica. I'm going to bring that with me so I could, whatever, drive with one arm and like hold it and play with the other. And so, whatever about that part. But I'm jamming out on the harmonica. And I know we're going to get into music in a little bit. But the experience of playing the harmonica flashed me right into the vivid memory of in my dream the night before I was playing my harmonica. And it just was such a powerful moment of recognition that I never would have thought to pick up the harmonica. It wouldn't have resonated the same way if I hadn't dreamt about the harmonica the night before. And so this idea that I was like picking it up of just the volition of whatever I thought was available to my conscious experience in that moment was a limited part of the spectrum that was influencing what I felt like was, clear free will and choice.
Right. Which reminded me of what I was wanting to touch on, and that is, I don't remember neurologically exactly what's happening, but there's a theory that kind of subconscious storyline that you notice you tapping into in your meditation, like a phase that you were being pulled into, that is running all the time. You could, we don't really know whether, I don't think there's a scientific explanation for whether we have sort of ordinary consciousness some of the time, and then we kind of shift into this visionary consciousness, or more, whatever we want to call it, subconscious, or this other, imaginative storyline, like daydreaming, for example. Is it possible that daydreaming is actually happening as its own continual narrative all the time? We're just not really in touch with it. Versus, do we need to shift from one to be in the other? And it's kind of this like theory of multidimensionality, and whether there is like this other dimension that exists that we just don't see or we catch glimpses of. And in the dream, well, I kind of lost my train of thought again, but that's kind of the idea.
Yeah, well, which is cool to lose our train of thought in the idea of going beyond that. I'll pick it up, which is
Let me before I forget it, I just came back. This is what happens with old age, that we privilege the waking so much more than the dreaming. But if it is this continuum, and there is this other dimension that exists simultaneously, that's ongoing, and that it just kind of comes out in dream, why is it that we privilege, for example, not to project onto your experience, but we privilege the harmonica playing during the day because it has a kind of realness to it. And we say that, oh, it was inspired by the harmonica playing, during the dream or something like that. And I don't know that that's the way you're personally framing it, but generally speaking, we say, oh, well, that was just a dream, as opposed to, and this is what's real. But what if they both have their, an inherent reality or realness to them? And we've just, as the human species, kind of habitually, reinforced what we call the waking experience at the expense of the dreaming experience. But the dreaming is just as real and just as powerful, and maybe even more powerful, because of the imaginative capabilities that we have in those spaces. So at first glance, you could say, well, dreaming is this very like personal thing. It's happening inside my mind, and it's not part of the intersubjective reality. It's not happening with other people. Therefore, when I am in waking life with other people, it feels more real because there's this shared experience, this consensus. But what if it's possible to have that shared intersubjective consensus relational experience in your dreams, right? And suddenly your dreams are not just the space where your own mind goes at night to have an imaginative thing, but it's actually like another dimension, or maybe even series of dimensions, where there is other consciousnesses or other things that you can interact with. And if we were ever able to establish that is something that is possible, that throws the whole waking dream continuum into chaos, because suddenly waking life is not any more important or any more meaningful than our dreaming life. And maybe it's actually, we've got it backward.
yes, and it's so funny because when I was like, I'm going to pick it up, that's what I was going to speak to is the idea of what we call ordinary and non-ordinary. And, is that the altered state, or is this waking state the more altered state from the vantage point of our sort of non transitory nature? And yet, I like how you framed it that they're both aspects, they're both natural aspects of being. But if there is a way to collectivize experience in those subtle dimensions, which seems to be more reflective to me of what truth would be, that beyond the ephemeral experiences, there is, again, it's what we've been saying, this deeper root of shared experience in that transcends the limitations of space-time, and that it's not something that we get to one day, or that appears. It's not an outcome, but it is always already here. It's the substratum, the beneath and behind, the always already. And that is accessible, not only accessible to us, because that puts us outside of it, but is us. And we are emerging from it, not just when we're born and return to it when we die, but we're an emergent of, we'll call that for a moment, like tot capital T for the yoga dharma students, but that's happening now and now and now. So it's not that we're moving through linear time, it's as if linear time is passing through us, and we're in the big bang. Like, we are the big bang in a sense. We're unmanifest and manifest into each moment constantly, and we can localize identity in the stream of time and sort of fall into that forgetting of the deeper nature, or through these modalities we can reveal that which we are, which is this ever-present presence, and then have the experience of intersecting with time in the now as it. And that there's not stress there that comes from wondering about what will be or identifying with what was. There's the availability to be what is. And that's just, it's so profoundly beautiful. So yeah, thank you for bringing a whole nother depth into that. I wanted to
Yeah.
briefly presence before we continue Sri Aurobindo. I love that you presenced him. I love his writings. Actually, in the training that you came to teach in a few weeks, we'll be studying his Letters on Yoga, Volume 1, as part of the training. So yeah, like incredible contributions for anybody that is listening that's into these things. Highly recommend his writing. His works are profound. So.
Yeah. It's like the term that's been coming up a lot is, I see it like in the, I read articles about like the tech world and stuff like that, and they always use this term disruptor. And what we're doing, it was sort of like disrupting constructs, And I had once asked this question to I don't remember exactly the question that I asked, of course. This is that memory failing me again. But I had a conversation with a Tibetan Rinpoche, and I asked him something around the nature of freedom and like what it means to be free. And his response was, "You're free from constructs." And that's,
Mhm.
when you think about the way our lives are structured, it's all constructs, just things that like we've kind of agreements that have been made between people for generations, and maybe there are new agreements being made and some agreements are ending, like the agreement that the earth is round versus flat. I mean, imagine if we're living 600 700 years ago and we think that the earth is flat. That would
Right.
completely change everything. So we've just come to this realization that, like, we're actually, the earth is they used to think that the earth was in the center of the universe, and in a certain sense it is, but it's also part of this infinite ocean, this enormous, like, unfathomably large place. So breaking down constructs, including the construct that we're somehow finite and that like we have this limited amount of time to live and die, that's the way out. you know and anything that you can do, anything, whether it's like shifting to deep states of relaxation or cranking up your body through breath work or stepping into a flow of music or just being captivated by music. There's more and more studies coming out around um, the notion of being in awe, and just like the sheer benefit of being in awe when you're just completely taken away. Breath is taken away by something that you're seeing or experiencing. All these things shake us up out of this ultimate limiting construct, which is, I am this finite person that's going to die. And if we can figure out how to get out of that, even just for a few moments here and there, we are basically immortal.
So amazing. And it's not even like that we have to become free. It's like freeing ourselves from the idea that we're not already free.
Right.
And that it's not that I become free or I become bound. It's that mind becomes bound by the idea that it's not free. And so and so finding these, whether it's plants, music, pranayama, whatever the vehicle is, to embrace it as an opportunity to just reveal what is. And I love that you touched on awe, because my like my most like present practice I've been calling the awe of recognition, and it's something am present with every day right now. It's being in that state of awe, and just returning to it and utilizing the moments when I catch myself not being in it as the reminder to be in it. So it's like a little bit of it's like a pick six. It's like it's like catch and then return for a touchdown. But I wanted to share in the spirit of the like artistry and poetry. Can I share a poem with you?
Please.
I think it encapsulates this. Um, it's called A Day in the Life. What if I made each day into a ritual? I'd wake up each morning with the aim of switching the habitual, like the interstitial of a crystal whose fistful of seeming imperfections are actually wayfarers pointing ways to new directions, generating predilections that transcend the pretensions of the carefully constructed images we often portray but prefer not to mention. What if I begin my day 1 hour sooner, when the moon and the stars are like silent crooners, serenading me into their mystery, while I sit in meditation and consciously observe my relationship to my ingrained mental patterns and the way I perceive them, to the emotions they produce and the way I believe them without even questioning their reason or their truth. On this seat on my porch under the moon, I'm more like a sleuth, a mystical detective, choosing to become more selective with the beliefs I believe and the possibilities I can achieve if I didn't continue to keep my best tricks hidden up my sleeve, where the dreams I envision for me export themselves from outdated shelves in the land of make-believe, where the power to succeed is rooted in the premise of me choosing me. Then I take some time for me, nowhere to be. I'd most likely head to the beach to take a bath in the sea, just floating like seaweed, with no aim and no goal, just an hour to float in this body and mind where I give myself permission to feel undefined. I would give myself permission to feel undefined. Then I'd open to this day's part 2, where I enter the phase of the me's and you's, the hey, how are you? I'm good. How are you? When the truth is so much more complex. But maybe we'd feel too perplexed to answer the question with, today I need rest, or I'm really fucking blessed, or I feel like there's a giant gaping hole in the center of my chest, or I'm living in an empty nest and I could really use a hug. What if our conversations felt a little more snug, a little more vulnerable, even a tad more transparency? Then it'd become apparent that we're not in this alone, that we are each walking the maze through the lows and highs along the pathways back home. And instead of privatizing our pains and exaggerating our gains, we could refrain from that, guise, and open our eyes and become mesmerized by the beauty of it all, the rise and the falls. What if I saw each conversation as a ritual? An invitation to practice truth unconditional, knowing these choices are pivotal in reaching the pinnacle of our collective potential, where each encounter is instrumental because they reveal the signs and synchronicities that unravel our mysteries and unprison us from our histories. And as the day turns to night and the yang yields to yin, I turn back in, away from the active and into the receptive, where my perspective becomes more perceptive of the things I unconsciously picked up along the way through my day. I take some deep breaths and exhale their grip as I start to slip into a settled mood of ease and gratitude. And as my eyes close to fall asleep, my awareness opens to awaken to my dreams, opening to enchanted worlds and lucid scenes where celestial beings chant mantras into the skies and project yantras from their third eyes, opening wormholes to new worlds of fractal formations that yoke through our chakras, and they invite me to sip matcha while dancing ecstatically around fires that are portals to lands where beings are immortal and each one is luminous. And then one leans over to whisper in my ear that they are all just me. They are all just me. Tatvam asi, the one in we. Then giving me my mission for my earth expedition and setting me free back out of my dream that was maybe more real than the reality we ascribe to the world we see. Then the sun comes up and I open my eyes to create a new ritual for this new day because I'm a creator by design and that's what creators do. So that's my truth. How about you?
Wow.
Yeah. Feels like it
Could have started with that
summarizes
one.
it just like holds so many things. I didn't even think about it. And then it hit me as you're talking about these things. I'm like, oh, this is like these ideas that live in this poem.
That's an amazing poem.
Thank you. Yeah. That's it, and then we get to come back out and it's like, oh cool, it's not a trap that we're here. It's it's that we get to emerge from that formless world of infinite possibility to make beauty, to make art, to sing songs, to heal, to mature, to love, to serve, to grow. It's just we get to make the outside that matches the inside, the true reality. And that's the awe for me. That's where it hits the heart.
Yeah. And I think that's the biggest takeaway for me in all these years of doing it, is that I've arrived at a place where I don't just ascribe to, but experientially believe that the waking reality that we call reality is equally as dreamlike as the dreaming reality. Meaning, we are capable of so much, and so much creation, co-creation, and imaginative variation, and making this whole world is just like a big sandbox, this opportunity for play and exploration. And it doesn't, it, there's still ups and downs and highs and lows and everything in between, but it's not as fixed as we think that it is. And there's a lot to see here if only we slow down enough and open our eyes a little wider.
So it's like the seeming solidity and in your presence in the Buddhist traditions, and it's in the idea of shunyata, that emptiness, that what we experience is so solid and substantive, is equally malleable. It's all made of consciousness, and how consciousness changes matter instantly, and without regard to spatial distance, is profound. I don't know if you've come across in your studies the Mind Life Institute. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's super cool. They had one of the transcriptions they did from their summits. And for our listeners, these are conversations between leading scientists in various realms of science and Buddhist monks and the Dalai Lama. And there was one book that I had come across called Sleeping, Dreaming, Dying. And it's the transcriptions of those conversations where they were doing a deep dive analysis on these states that we're exploring today. But highly recommend for anybody that's interested. And I don't know if you've read this one or not, but if
No.
not, I feel like it would be like popcorn, you can just eat it up. So really powerful. So could we dive back into this current? So we're journaling and
Mm-hmm. So, right. So it starts with journaling, and journaling is the thread that, regardless of where you evolve with all this practice, you'll still be journaling, years later. It's the same process. And where, while I'm sure there are some people who just like have incredible natural gifts with this, I've found that if I let my journaling practice go, my dream awareness suffers. So it really has, like most things, the more you can kind of routinize it and really keep it up, the more you keep that muscle strong, or that ability strong. But it's not. It shouldn't feel like it's too daunting, And the other piece to this is, if it begins to feel like a burden, you're working too hard. And I think that goes for just about anything. But if it starts to feel like you're squeezing, trying to make something happen, ease off, because sometimes the breakthrough comes when you let go of that attachment to like needing some kind of sign of success or something like that. So it's very much the middle way, trying to keep things in balance. But adding this, assuming you don't already do this, you're basically like adding this new thing to your life. So once you get journaling down, dream yoga is kind of, from my perspective, it encapsulates all aspects of dreaming. It's like any yoga. You're sort of learning your craft inside and out, every single aspect of it, as much as you want to take on. So even if you weren't lucid dreaming, there's still a lot that you can get out of your quote unquote regular dreams, which are really anything but regular. The piece that it's worth kind of jumping right into, it's maybe not the most, there are practical steps for developing lucidity that we can talk a little bit about. And maybe I guess we start there. If you were to search on the internet for lucid dreaming techniques, incubation meaning, techniques that you use to kind of awaken a lucid dream or grow this ability. Things like reality checks or reality testing, where you stop several times throughout the day to check in with yourself. And a really common one would be to just hold your hands up in front of your face and read the lines in your hands and ask yourself, am I dreaming right now? Alternatively, you could reassert to yourself, I am dreaming right now. So there's a little twist on that, depending on your tradition and your personal philosophy, that we won't really get into right now. But the idea is the same. When you stop, you sort of break yourself out of the trance of your daily routine, and you have like a meditative moment where you question truth, you question reality. And the more you do that, let's say you were to do that once an hour for a minute, you just stop what you're doing, look at your hands, ask yourself, am I dreaming? And do it with austerity, like you're really meaningfully. Sooner or later, while you're dreaming, you're going to stop to do that. You're going to do the same ritual. And in that moment, you will perceive your hands differently most likely you'll perceive your hands differently than you would in your waking life. They may be glowing, they may seem kind of fuzzy, they may have ripples, all these sort of psychedelic or like imaginative things that will tip you off that you're actually in a dream state. And in that moment, you have achieved lucidity or awareness that you're in a dream. And that's where the fun really starts. So that would be one thing you could work on, would be a reality test or reality check. There was a period where I'd set an alarm on my phone, and I would stop every hour, really, every hour throughout the whole day, and just do those things repeatedly, to the point where I didn't need to set alarms. I would just every 5 minutes, I'd sort of stop and like remind myself and do that. Now, you've got to be careful, because you can just, in a way, you're kind of hacking your own mind. So if it starts to feel like you're losing your grip of what's real, on the way to breaking down, to deconstructing reality, if you feel like you're losing a foothold and you're having a hard time functioning with that, or it's causing distress, take a break, step back, right? It's too much. It's a little bit like stretching yourself too far, too fast. You're gonna pull a muscle, you're gonna hurt something. So go easy with yourself. Reality testing, and then probably the complementary technique that I recommend the most is what's called the wake back to bed technique, where assuming you were to sleep 8 hours on any given night, you wake yourself up after about 6 hours, do 45 minutes or so of meditation or reading, or even just, take a little walk or something that kind of brings more waking consciousness. And then you go back to sleep for another 2 hours. And in that last hour and a half, 2 hours of sleep after having this broken it up, you'll have more waking awareness in your REM states of sleep, which is where dreaming is most vivid. So you're sort of taking advantage of these last couple hours of sleep where your dreams are typically more vivid anyway, and you're bringing more waking awareness to those times. So between journaling, reality testing, right, which could be as simple as looking at your hands, and breaking up your sleep so that you have about a 45-minute or so break prior to those your last REM cycle of the night, your last 90 minutes or 2 hours of sleep are the best ways to induce a lucid dream. So that's lucidity, and we can go into lucidity more and more and more. But the piece that I really want us to put out there for you is that even if your dreams aren't lucid, you can still work with them in a really powerful way by picking up on, before we talked a little bit about in your journaling, being aware of these potent moments, the moments where that seem to be meaningful. Well, what makes them meaningful is that you have some kind of emotional or visceral connection to them. When you're recalling your dream, you remember, and in the moment of your dream when you're going through it, there's these moments of like, oh, I feel something here. Whereas the rest of the time may just be kind of noisy. So what you're looking for are the moments where you feel something. And once you've got one of those, and it could be from a dream that you had 10 years ago or for a dream that you had last week or last night, when you wake up for your waking, your daily life, you can go sit down for meditation and bring back the imagery of the dream, like you're putting on a pair of clothes, take it out of the closet and map the experience in your body, replay the dream for yourself until you get to that moment of visceral or emotional intensity. And then pause the replay of the dream and sit with that feeling, because that is where the energy is. And if you can make contact with those feelings, you begin a process of unearthing the significance of that experience, because that feeling, the emotion, the visceral intensity, it has information stored in it. And whether it takes 10 minutes of sitting with it or 10 days of sitting with it, at some point you're going to unearth something that is valuable for you. And in that unearthing, you are making deep changes within yourself, and it may even make like really significant changes that then impact your choices that you make in your life, that might break you of habits, that help you heal from past trauma. Whatever it is you're tapping into there is of significance and of importance on a healing path.
Well, I feel like you just gave me, but everybody listening, a really, really beautiful and powerful gift. Thank you.
My pleasure. Only took 15 years to to figure that out, and a minute and a half to explain it. But hopefully, you can take it and run with it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's amazing. So a few different ways to work with accessing the lucid dream. So it can be even after the fact, if the dream wasn't lucid, picking back up on that idea of how connected our meditations are to, it's still our consciousness we're working with. So how connected our meditations are to those subtle dream states that we can use the prompt of the writing to kind of cue the mind back into the memory of the experience, and you enter back into the stream, hit the point that has significance, which is really the key takeaway that I drew out of what you shared. This is the inflection point of the experience, to pause, get curious, and notice what comes up out of that, because that's where the hidden treasure lives. And
Right.
It's not just about being lucid for the sake of being lucid, but for the impact of what that offers to our broader journey as consciousness itself. So that's something profound and an incredible gem of this episode, and for our lives, we were in this episode, and so thank you for that. I want to go
Before
to
you go, I wanted to say also, you can do that through writing, through any form of artistry, painting, drawing, making music, in conversation. It's just using the body as an instrument, being so in tune and listening so deeply to your own body while still being present with what's happening around you. And I think that's kind of the work, is to find that balance. That's, the practice of our lives. But um, anytime you get that tinge, that hit, that visceral, like, ooh, like there's something there, it's an opportunity that's the inflection point, an opportunity to then go and take a look at it. And dreams are just, a really special venue for that, because they are giving us a window into our unconscious, and we get that every night.
It's just wild. It's right there. I mean, in the Mandukya Upanishad, the teachings on Om, they describe the four states that are cycled, really three that are cycled through, and then the ever present, what you were describing earlier, backdrop to the experience. And so we're in a waking state, we're in a dreaming state, and then this third state of dreamless sleep. I wondered and wanted to ask if I guess, just what your thoughts are on the potential of that space on this.
Yeah.
This.
This is the piece I wanted to add, was that, take it one step further, which is when you can become lucid in your dreams and do the same kind of practice, where in the midst of the gift of lucidity is not the end point. It's not the goal. It's a stop along the way. It becomes a vehicle for you to practice. So when you can become lucid, the question is, well, what do you do when you're lucid? Do you try to just, like, suddenly you got the keys to the car, and are you going to just do whatever you want and make incredible things happen? Sure. But at a certain point, you probably will get bored of that, because you'll start to wonder, what's the point? It's an opportunity, lucidity, being lucid in a dream, to do the same practice that we just mentioned, to allow the unconscious material to come up and come through you, to let the dream happen. And they kind of like Scott, like your poem. And then in the moment where something substantial happens, when there is meaning, when there's visceral sensation, when the energy of the dream captivates you, you surrender. You allow it to happen. And in that experience, you are processing that emotion in real time. So rather than waiting until you wake up to kind of go back into it and explore it, you can explore it right then and there in the dream. And when you do that, that's when the lights really turn on. The whole dream will kind of collapse, because it's almost like it's served its purpose. Like all the symbolism and imagery of the dream have gotten you to that point where you're now making contact with the deeper part of yourself. And in those moments, lucid dreamers will report the dreams just almost disappearing. And what you're left with is a kind of luminosity. It's just this experience of light. And you could say that it's a kind of dreamless sleep. You're present in the emptiness, in the nothingness. And you can go even further in that. There's an expression in consciousness studies and psychology that I love, that they say it's turtles all the way down, which means, there's you can go even deeper into the emptiness, where you're, as opposed to just witnessing the emptiness and kind of observing it, from this place of, wow, my dream just evaporated, and, I'm just in touch with this feeling, and there's just light and kind of this, infinite nothingness. You can become the infinite nothingness and rest in that. And there is a kind of ebb and flow of moving between the subject and the object, identifying as the ocean and witnessing the ocean, and progressively, sort of descending is maybe not the best word, but just having deeper and deeper experiential realization of what it's like to be that. And that is where lucid dreaming, I think, is just like some next level kind of, tool for exploring consciousness, because the body has no resistance, right? Like we said before, all your defenses are down, and you can give yourself this opportunity to basically making changes or shifting consciousness without, in an unfettered way.
There's a idea that lives inside of the tantric philosophy, um, what's called the quiver, and the word is spanda, and it's like
Mm-hmm.
this. You're familiar with that, like pulsing, sort of complementary, co-creative opposites. Like you're moving out, but you're moving in, and you don't see them as oppositional. You are that pulsation itself. And the surrender piece that you added, I think it's so vital for this, because I think sometimes what happens is when we, and it like disrupts the subtle experience, because we're so like shook maybe a little bit by the differential. Maybe I'm not sure you could speak to that, that it kind of like shoots us out. But being equipped for the surrender lets us sort of dissolve into these subtle experiences. And I feel like they happen in lots of domains. I mean, it's like it could be in this, in like you use the word venue of lucid dreaming, but it could be like uh like I'm thinking they'd like hooked up like EEGs to jam bands, and they were like watching their brain waves sync up when they would start to jam together. Or like it, like in like sex, it could be in like dancing, it could be in transformational breath work. Like the moment where the intensity peaks to actually go almost, I don't want to say dull, but it's like like a dropping or dissolving sort of a feeling, and almost like a merging, I guess. And I'm having a hard time finding the right descriptor for this experience, but again, subjective here is it feels like if we could surrender into that, there's something profound, there's something ecstatic in that state experience. And
Yeah.
it's just, yeah, it defies comprehension. I wonder if you've ever experienced it as um, not light, but not dark. Like I've experienced it like this emptiness, not dark as in shadow, but dark as in like infinite blackness.
Yeah.
And so please, I can see you got some shares coming up, bubbling up.
Yeah. Well, the way that I can kind of visualize it is it's a little bit like shedding filters that keep us from the pure source. So for example, you might have, and there, this is documented in Buddhism, and to some extent in yoga, the various stages of samadhi, which I'm not, an expert on, but like all the technical, uh, the differentiations between them, because it's almost futile to try and explain them unless you have been in them, and can really, speak from experience. What I've found is, as I've progressed on the dreaming path, is one night I might have an experience that you could say would be like a level 1 samadhi state that has its own qualities to it. Maybe it has a kind of a blue light tinge to it, a sort of bluish hue to the light that sometimes you hear about in things like astral projection and stuff like that. So I don't want to get too much into that, but it might have a certain kind of quality or a certain kind of feeling. And then the next night you might have, or even, a few moments later in that dream, something that kind of comes up and scares you, or the experience feels like it becomes too intense for you, and you either wake up or you shy away from it. And that's sort of like, if you imagine like a video game, it's like you're up now at the end of the level, and you've got to somehow like get past this holdup, whatever it is that's stopping you there. And then hopefully you have another opportunity. Maybe it's, let's say it's the next night or a few nights later, to kind of brush up right against this next level of intensity. And all the while through your practice, and for me, it's been, through breathing practice, breath through pranayama, through yoga nidra, deep relaxation, by learning to soften and surrender more deeply, I'm preparing myself for those moments where I have the opportunity to let my capacity expand a little further, to shed whatever the holdup was, whatever that last filter was, and go to the next stage, and advance. And yeah, I mean, you might have experiences where you feel yourself, or rather, you feel an incredible amount of energy. So, for example, you just like feel tingling sensation, taking over your whole being. It feels kind of orgasmic, not necessarily sexually orgasmic, but a kind of like whole being orgasmic experience. Like you're just like touching pure electricity. And then the next night, you might feel like you are the electricity, at which point you don't really feel any sensation because there's no friction between your concept of self and the electricity. You're just it. And it kind of keeps going that way. This sort of the dance between Purusha and Prakriti, between energy and consciousness. And like it can feel ecstatic when you're touching the electricity of it all and have its own kind of quality, maybe it's colorful, maybe it's, it has a certain light quality to it. And then a following experience, a subsequent experience might not feel ecstatic in the same way, but sublime and incredibly peaceful and still, because now you are that energy and there's no separation between yourself and it. And so to say, it's hard to say whether it's a deeper state or a more profound state, or that you somehow advanced. It's just a different state. But there is levels of these things that are documented, like these deepening states of samadhi, and yeah, they kind of alternate, and I think you see the whole spectrum of things. And the closer you get, if you're not entirely prepared for those moments where you touch a next level, for example, there's going to be a kind of contraction away from it, because there's going to be sort of an oh shit moment, like that's too hot to touch, right? Or it's too intense, my body can't handle that. One of my teachers once said, it's like you're running 220 through a 110. And if that happens, you, as a lucid dream once told me, you have to continue to purify so that you can continue to open.
Yeah, my teacher taught it to me like you're pouring acid into a 2-liter soda bottle.
Yep.
And, it just can't contain that. And I actually love the framing of the samadhi levels. And so for our listeners that might not be familiar and want to go deeper into this construct, this is the first pada of the Yoga Sutras. So if you pick up the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali and you do a little deeper dive into that substantive part of the first pada, which my critique of Patanjali is it's probably the most confusing part to make sense of. But if we could utilize this conversation as a really great way of subtilizing our awareness to this idea that samadhi levels themselves, there's like a big category of it's called sabija and nirbija, meaning like with seed or without seed, meaning like with seed of identification as the or limited ego self we were talking about at the beginning, to then ultimately the goal of yogic arts to realize ourselves as that which we have always been and could never not be, this true sense of self, when we do this sort of increasingly subtilized experience. And most of you think of them. I love the idea that you had presented as levels. When I teach this in training, I do it with a dry erase board, and it kind of goes through this level and then it goes down to the next level, and we make our way through. And if you can imagine, I know if you're listening, it might be a little more challenging, but there's at each sort of floor of the house or each level, moving, if like we were reading from left to right, the left side of each level would be what we would hold as like it's called sampragnata, and then that means sam means like completely with, and pra means like pre, like first, or like the smallest, and so it's defining the nya, the j, like sort of without the concentration of attention. It's what Nick is describing is moving from like a focused concentrative experience at a particular level to like I'm focusing on it to I'm it without the focus. And then as we're able to experience that without the efforting of holding attention to it, it allows us to kind of clear that level and then drop in, and it moves through these various levels. There's like kind of savitarka, nirvitarka, savichara, nirvichara, and it keeps moving like, and it goes through these ananda levels. So it's like I am bliss ananda, like nirnada. And instead of like I'm experiencing bliss, it's like I'm bliss experiencing. And then ultimately it goes into the asmita, which is like the identification with the ego nature of us. And there is like the being present to that aspect of us, and then the actual falling away. And when, as I understand it, when we fully like, it's almost like an ingesting. It's like who the eye that's meditating. I sometimes depicted in training, like taking a shoe with the shoelaces tied into a knot, and then taking that kind of telomerous end of it, that little capsule, and then running it back through the middle, pulling it apart, and it poof, and it opens, and that's that nirbija samadhi level. And that's where we move near bija, meaning like without seed anymore. And so that's if we could speak of like the idea of liberation, realization, moksha, however we call it, it's really this transmigration through a sequence of practices where we acculturate or normalize ourselves to these more subtle realms of what we are.
That's definitely what it feels like, kind of the untying of knots, you know,
And the untying.
and things just sort of loosen up a little bit. And then, so the question I've always had is, well, what do I do with this? You know, what do we do with this? Do we chase the high? I mean, those experiences personally have been so beautiful and impactful, and like, you know, they've informed my path in life and all sorts of things. But what I've always come back to is whether or not I'm being nice to the person that I'm having a conversation with. You know, am I really being a good person? Because all that seeking and stuff, you know, like, what's it worth if we can't like come back to, you know, our day to day, moment to moment, like, oh, here we are together, and, you know, can we just love each other and not hold, you know, and help each other open and feel relaxed while we're there together, you know. Because if you can't, it's great if you can relax, you know, while you're in the depths of sleep and dream. But if you can't like really relax and disarm yourself in another person when it counts, what's it worth, you know?
Absolutely. It's funny. I was just glancing over at the questions I had for you for this podcast, and we actually did get to, I wanted to get more into psilocybin and into music, and we didn't get to explore those spaces, but in pranayama and nidra, but in a way we did, because I'm imagining that like regardless of the vehicle, there are different ways to point to this ultimate sense of truth, and the end of it was and then the last question that I had was, so given all this, at the end of the day, isn't it ultimately about the heart? Isn't it ultimately revealing that the ground of being is love, not as verb in a sense, but as noun, as not something that's transactional, but something that is?
Yes. Yes, it is. It all comes back to the heart.
It does. Yeah. So, well, from my heart to yours, thank you so much for saying yes, making the time to share all that you have explored in this archaeological dig of consciousness that you've been on, and bringing it into this forum and letting it live here, for people to take in when they're ready and come back to again. And if you're listening, I hope that you found some real valuable tools and some practices to take up. you can find Nick. Can you share your website or any social media handles with people that might want to reach out?
Sure. Website, the easiest way to find me is nickatlas.com. You could search for evolutionary education. The website is evolutionaryeducation.org, but my personal website will take you there. You basically just search Dr. Nick Atlas on Instagram and Facebook and stuff. I'm not so super active on those at the moment, but you can find me there. You can send me a message. You can send me an email. My book is listed on both websites, and I've got a couple more books that I'm hoping to finish in the next few years, though they seem to have their own timeline. And the YouTube, probably that's, there's some guided yoga nidra on YouTube, some other talks on some of the similar kinds of topics, and in particular, the thing, it's funny, the word that didn't come up a lot during our conversation is empathy. And I think that's been a huge interest of mine that kind of has come out of all of this stuff. We've been talking about the heart and like meeting people in the heart. And I think that being able to really empathize and express emotion with another person and help them express emotion, maybe even express their emotion through your body, that to me is like the frontier of this stuff, at least right now. That's
So
like
beautiful.
the co-processing of karma.
Yeah, because that's the piece where the heart is the great alchemist, and it's like not just co-regulating nervous systems, but what can happen when a heart is present with another heart, when a human is present with another human. That's amazing. I wish we had more time to keep unpacking, but maybe we'll circle back another time. But in the meantime, thank you for being here. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, listening, and supporting this podcast. If you enjoyed it, please rate, review, subscribe, do all the things. I'm still learning what they are because this is all still new, but I appreciate your support and help in letting this podcast live in a way that will ultimately reach more people with the work that we're trying to do and support here. And wishing you a blessed day. Until next time, take good care.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nick.